At family dinner, my daughter said, "Let her eat later." So I quietly walked out and walked into the lawyer's office to cut her from my $1.03 estate. I still remember the smell of truffle oil drifting from Jessica's open kitchen that night, the clinking of wine glasses, the burst of polite laughter that did not belong to me. She had invited a cluster of sponsors, real estate developers, and clean tech investors to show off her new life, her new house, her new status. I had been asked to drop by for dinner as if I were some quaint relic from a small-town museum. I dressed carefully, a navy dress that still fit my shoulders, a silver brooch I had not worn in 20 years, hair pinned and sprayed. I walked in thinking I would sit at the table, meet her friends, hear her children tell stories about school. Instead, the moment I crossed the threshold, she took one look at me, at the shoes that had walked fish markets, at the hands still scarred from years of gutting and scaling, and her face hardened. "Kitchen," she said, almost under her breath but loud enough for everyone to hear. I hesitated, a foot still on the marble floor of her foyer, and she pressed a folded apron into my palm like it was a bill. "You're not even worth a dog," she hissed, eyes flicking toward her guests. "Either cook or get out of my sight." The sentence landed like a slap across my whole life. The room went quiet. I saw one man look at his watch, another woman glance at the chandelier. Not a single voice rose for me. I stood there, the apron soft in my hand, the smell of her perfume heavy as salt water. My grandson, sitting at the end of the table, opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. I turned, walked down the hall, past the photos of her children, past the framed degrees, and out into the cold Ohio air. The sound of forks resumed behind me before the door even clicked shut. I sat in my car with the engine off, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Through the window, I could see her new dog, purebred, manicured, lying on a velvet cushion in the living room, while I stood outside like a delivery driver. My stomach knotted, not from hunger but from a kind of old, wet shame. I had fed that girl with fish I could barely afford, sold off my wedding ring to buy her her first laptop, walked miles to the bus stop in snow that cracked my heels just so she could take ballet. And now she measured me against a dog and found me less. For a moment I wanted to knock on the door and demand she take it back, but then another thought arrived, slow and clean. I started the car, turned the headlights on, and drove home without a word. All night I lay awake, listening to the old refrigerator hum. I saw my husband's face as he had looked before he left, the day Jessica was born. I smelled again the cold dawns at the market, my gloves stiff with ice, my back bent over crates of catfish and tilapia. I thought of the time Jessica came home from school in tears because the boys called her fish girl and mimed pinching their noses. I had held her and promised, "One day you'll be proud." Maybe she never had been. Maybe I had been proud enough for both of us. But now, as the clock glowed 3:17 a.m., I realized something sharp. Pride without respect is just another burden. She did not respect me. She did not even see me as a person. She saw me as a smell, a shadow, a pair of hands. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on the couch, flipping through the album Jessica had left behind. Each picture, a birthday, a Christmas morning, a science fair, told a story she no longer claimed. I spoke aloud, to no one, just to the silence. "You were never ashamed of the cake I baked or the hands that held you when you were sick." The silence, heavy and listening, gave me back something I hadn't felt in years: certainty. By dawn, my decision had hardened like old nets. I brewed tea, put on my cleanest coat, and drove to the lawyer's office downtown before the sun had fully risen. "Mr. Colby looked up from his desk when I walked in. Before leaving home, I had taken out the old envelope marked "Important" where I had stored our previous will, ID copies, and utility documents. I wanted no delay. I needed the law to hear me, this time in my own words. He had drawn up my will 5 years earlier. "Mrs. Brandt," he said, "this is a surprise." I placed my hands flat on his desk. "I want to make changes," I said. "Today." He pushed aside a stack of papers and nodded slowly. "Something happen?" "Yes," I said. "Enough happened." I told him, in as few words as possible, what had been said at the dinner. He winced but did not interrupt. He reached for my file and flipped it open. "We can remove her from the estate," he said. "Redirect assets, add contingencies." I watched his pen hover above the paper, waiting for my confirmation. And then I felt the heat rise in my chest, not from shame this time, but from a kind of fierce, clean justice I had never allowed myself. If she could humiliate me in front of strangers, I could reclaim my story in front of the law. If this story stirred something in your heart, if you've ever been told to stay quiet, to accept less, or to endure what felt unbearable, then I ask you, let the world hear us. Smash that hype button. Not for anger, not for pity, but because stories like this matter. They remind us that even those who smell of fish can carry the scent of strength. Your support keeps these stories alive, echoing far and wide. Thank you for standing with us. Keep listening. Because what came next was not revenge, it was recognition. I signed the first set of papers at 8:45 a.m. By 9, she was no longer named anywhere in my will. Over the years, I had lived frugally. After selling the old family house and moving into a smaller apartment, the leftover insurance from my husband, along with compounded retirement savings and a small inheritance from my aunt, had quietly grown. It wasn't sudden wealth. It was careful survival. The $1.3 million that had been meant for her was now marked undisclosed beneficiary, pending my final decision. Mr. Colby slid the folder back to me. "Do you want to notify her?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "I want her to find out the way I found out, publicly." He nodded. "It's your right." I stood, buttoned my coat, and stepped back into the morning. The sky was pale and brittle, the kind of cold that stings your teeth. But for the first time in years, I felt warm. Driving home, I passed the market where I used to work. The sign was faded now, the awning ripped, but I could still see myself 20 years younger, hauling buckets, slipping on ice, saving coins in a jar to buy Jessica's textbooks. I pulled into the parking lot and sat there for a moment, watching a younger woman unload crates of fish from a truck, her gloves wet, her eyes tired but steady. She looked up and met my gaze. I lifted my hand in a small salute. She smiled back, not knowing who I was, just another old woman in a car. But in that moment I remembered something I had forgotten. Dignity is not given by children, or sponsors, or applause. It is earned in the dark hours, in the cold, when no one is watching. When I reached home, the answering machine blinked. A message from Jessica. "Mom, where did you go?" the guests were asking. Her voice was sugar over stone. "You really embarrassed me walking out like that. Call me back." I erased it without listening to the end. Then, I sat down at my kitchen table, opened my notebook, and began to write everything I had never said. Not as an apology, as a record. Because if she wanted to erase me from her story, I would write my own. And this time, the ink would not fade. There was a time when my world began and ended at the fish market. 17 years of my life were measured in pounds of tilapia and catfish, wrapped in newspaper and ice, carried across cracked pavement and sharp mornings. I worked 6 days a week at the docks, arriving before sunrise, leaving long after the last customer. I did not have time for dreams or vacations or pretty things. I had Jessica. When she was little, she would wait for me by the window, her tiny hands pressed against the glass. I would come home smelling like salt, fish guts, and the bitter metallic scent of scales. She would wrinkle her nose and say, "Ew," but then run into my arms anyway. I thought that was love, acceptance in spite of the stink. But as she grew older, the ew stayed longer. It began to sound less like a child teasing her mother and more like a wall being built, brick by brick. When she was 10, a boy at school shouted across the cafeteria, "Hey, fish girl, does your mom live in a boat?" The entire table laughed. Jessica came home that day and refused to hug me. She said my jacket made her sick. I threw it in the wash 3 times that night. The smell never really left. Neither did the shame. I started bringing a change of clothes and perfume in a plastic bag, spraying myself down before walking into parent-teacher conferences. Still, I saw the way the other mothers looked at me, their tailored coats, their manicured nails, their noses twitching ever so slightly. One even asked me once, "And what do you do, dear?" with a smile so tight it could slice paper. I replied, "I sell dignity by the pound," and walked away before I embarrassed Jessica further. She was a smart girl, got into honors classes, joined the debate team, read books thicker than bricks. I made sure she had every notebook, every outfit, every lunch packed with care. I stayed up nights fixing broken appliances so we would not have to pay a handyman. I took on extra shifts when she wanted to go to summer camp. She never knew how many times I went to bed without dinner, just to make sure she had everything. I never told her. That was my mistake. She started to ask me to drop her off 2 blocks away from school. "It's easier," she said. "Traffic is bad." But I knew. I saw the way she flinched when classmates waved at us. I saw the way she wiped her seat after I got out of the car. One day, when she was 16, she came home holding a flyer. It was for a summer program in New York, young entrepreneurs, public speaking, networking with CEOs. It cost more than 3 months of my pay. I smiled and said, "We'll find a way." I sold my wedding earrings. I borrowed money from a friend I had not spoken to in years. I cleaned houses on Sundays, knees aching, just to cover the deposit. When Jessica came back, she was radiant. She spoke with a new accent, a new tone. She told me I needed to rebrand myself, said that being poor was not an identity. I laughed. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean," she said, "you do not have to look like you just came from the docks." I had stopped working at the fish market by then. My hands could not take the cold anymore. The joints in my fingers had started to lock in winter, and my back ached every time I bent. A neighbor told me the bakery down the street was hiring. It paid less, but it was indoors, and the air smelled of bread instead of fish. I took the job without hesitation. I had moved on to working at a bakery, where the air smelled of cinnamon instead of mackerel, but still, the fish lingered. In my nails, in my pores, in her memory. She applied to college with essays about overcoming childhood shame. I only saw one of them, printed out and left on the table by mistake. It said, "My mother worked in a trade that clung to our lives like a shadow." It was not just her hands that smelled, it was my future. I stared at those words until the page went blurry. I folded it back up and never mentioned it. Years later, when she landed her first big job, I brought her flowers. She opened the door wearing a silk robe and smiled, distracted. "Thanks, Mom," she said, without hugging me. I placed the bouquet on the table and noticed something else: receipts from a cosmetic clinic. A few weeks later, she told me she had fixed her nose. "The bump is gone," she said. "I finally look like I belong in the city." I reached up instinctively, touched my own face. My nose, wide and flat at the bridge, the same one her grandmother had, the same one Jessica used to kiss in the morning before school. She laughed, but not kindly. "Relax, it is not like it was genetic gold. You should thank me. The bloodline just got upgraded." That night, I sat alone with my tea, turning over the receipt she had left behind. The number was almost identical to the amount I had given her 3 months ago to help with rent. She had used it to erase my face from hers. You would think a mother would scream, or cry, or confront her, but I did none of those things. I just went to the mirror, studied the features that had once held love, and said quietly, "Let her look in the mirror and see what she cut." Sometimes, silence is sharper than words. Sometimes, it slices deeper than a surgeon's blade. And sometimes, justice comes not with confrontation, but with clarity. She had used my sacrifices to bury me. I had stayed invisible for too long. But the thing about women like me, women who come home smelling like fish and dignity, is that we do not rot. We marinate. And the longer we sit, the stronger we get. So keep listening, because this story, it is just beginning. There are certain papers a mother never wants to be asked to sign. I remember the day Jessica brought me the form. It was wrinkled, highlighted, with little arrows pointing to blank spaces where I was supposed to put my name. "It's for income reclassification," she said, sliding it across the table like it was just another permission slip. "If you sign this, I qualify for low-income scholarships. Ivy League mom, this is what gets me in." I read the form. I read it again. And then I set it down. "I can't lie," I said. Jessica rolled her eyes. "You do realize everyone does it, right? They expect it. It's part of the game." I shook my head slowly. "We don't qualify, Jess. I work. I've never stopped working. I can't pretend we have nothing when I'm breaking my back to give you something." "You're breaking your back for what? Dignity?" Her voice rose. "Dignity doesn't get you into Harvard. Dignity doesn't pay for dorms and books. God, why are you always so obsessed with being honest? No one cares." "I care," I said, barely above a whisper. She slammed her palm against the table. "You're just afraid of rich people, of success. You've always been small." She walked out, slammed her door, and did not speak to me for 2 weeks. When the rejections came, Yale, Stanford, Columbia, she left them unopened on the counter like they were utility bills. She blamed me for each one. "Harvard would have taken me if you weren't so hen," she said one night, after a long silence. "But you just had to be the noble peasant." She said it like the word mother had a bad taste. I worked 3 jobs that year: nursing assistant, bakery clerk, and evening janitor. I never told her how tired I was, or how often my knees gave out on the stairs. I just wanted her to believe I was strong. But she didn't see strength. She saw stubbornness. She saw failure. Jessica ended up going to a well-respected state university, then clawed her way into the business world like a tiger with designer heels. She rebranded herself completely. No more stories of fish markets. No mention of single mothers. She told people she came from nothing, as if I were part of that nothing. I kept quiet. I always had. But then came the gala. Jessica was being honored at a regional women's entrepreneurship event. She invited me, begrudgingly, as if she were checking off a list. "Try not to wear anything floral," she said. "The lighting's very modern." I wore black. I sat in the back. I clapped when they called her name. She stepped up to the microphone in a silk pantsuit, her hair pulled back like a TV anchor. Her voice had that sharp upward swing she practiced in the mirror. She thanked the board, her sponsors, her mentors. And then she said it. "I'm proud to be the first person in my family to know which fork to use." The room laughed politely. A few women nodded in admiration. I sat there, my hands folded, my mouth still. She did not mention my name. Not once. It was as if I had never held her through fevers, never fought with her insurance providers, never wiped her tears when she thought she failed algebra. It was as if I had never existed. And yet, there she was, carving me out of her origin story with perfect posture and a confident smile. I looked around the room, at the chandeliers, the catered hors d'oeuvres, the women with pearls, and I felt suddenly very old. Not because of my age, because of what had been erased. Jessica had not just removed me from the story. She had replaced me. She had built a pedestal out of my sacrifice and then kicked me out of the photo. I walked out before dessert was served. That night, I found the old application forms in a box in the closet, still unsigned, still clean. I looked at my own handwriting on the back of a utility envelope. "Don't give up your name for a number." I remember writing that to myself the night I made the decision not to forge our income. Now, years later, she had forged something worse, our entire history. She thought knowing which fork to use made her superior. But here's what I know. You can master etiquette and still be ungrateful. You can be articulate and still be cruel. And you can wear silk while smelling of contempt. Sometimes the deepest wounds do not bleed. They echo. And in that echo, I heard every quiet thing I had ever endured. But I would not stay quiet much longer. I had not been to Jessica's house since the night she told me I was not even worth a dog. But weeks passed, and I convinced myself to try again. Not for her, but for the grandchildren. They were growing up fast, and I still had hope, thin and trembling like old thread, that maybe, somehow, I could still matter to someone in that house. I brought over fresh bread I had baked that morning. The crust was uneven, and the smell reminded me of Saturdays when Jessica was still small enough to fit into my lap. I rang the bell. The youngest opened the door, and hugged my legs before yelling, "Mom, Grandma's here." Jessica walked in, wearing a cream blazer and a face that could slice granite. "Oh, you came without calling first," she said, her tone clipped like a corporate memo. "I brought bread," I replied, gently, holding it out like an apology. She took it with 2 fingers, as if it were wrapped in fish scales, and placed it on the counter without looking at it again. "Do not let the kids eat too much. Gluten bloats them," she muttered. While she turned to her phone, I wandered into the living room, and that is when I saw it. The wall. The photo wall. Rows of polished, framed images: Jessica's wedding, vacations in Greece, her children's birthdays, her husband shaking hands with men in suits. And then I saw the photo that used to have me in it. A Thanksgiving dinner from years ago, one where I had carved the turkey, smiling as Jessica's firstborn pulled at my sleeve. Except, I was not in the picture anymore. My body had been cropped out. In my place was her golden retriever, Winston, wearing a tiny tuxedo. At first, I thought it was a different photo. I leaned in. No, it was the same setting, the same tablecloth, the same moment, but retouched, edited, erased. A child tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma," he whispered, "why are you not in the wall pictures?" I looked down at him. His eyes were wide and soft. I opened my mouth, but before I could answer, Jessica called from the kitchen. "She does not match the decor, sweetie. We are doing neutrals now." She said it as if she were excusing an ugly couch. I stood frozen, my hands clenched. She had not just cropped me out of a picture. She had cropped me out of her memory. When I left that afternoon, I walked slower than usual. I felt heavier, not because of age, but because of the weight of being unwanted in places where I had once been the foundation. That night, I could not sleep. I pulled out the old albums from my cabinet, the ones she had left behind when she moved out. I flipped through pictures she had forgotten I kept. Her first birthday, her first dance, her first pair of ballet slippers, all paid for by fingers that bled scaling fish. All captured by a woman who now, apparently, did not match the furniture. And then, because curiosity is both a curse and a compass, I searched her name online. Her professional website came up first. It was polished, sleek, impressive. She had a blog now, and under the tab labeled "Memoir in Progress," I found an excerpt. I read it twice, then a third time. It said, "I am not the product of blood. I am not the product of weak traditions or small-minded survival. I am the result of courage, risk, and refinement. I built myself. My roots are irrelevant. I am the daughter of ambition, not of shame." I sat very still. My hands did not shake. They simply folded quietly into my lap like they had done 1,000 times before. She had rewritten herself again. And this time, she had signed it with pride. There was no mention of the woman who mopped grocery store floors to pay for her piano lessons. No mention of the woman who slept sitting up on a hospital chair when Jessica had pneumonia at 8. No mention of the mother who skipped dinner 4 nights a week so she could afford textbooks. She was not just erasing me from her walls. She was deleting me from her narrative. And now, she wanted the world to applaud her for it. But let me tell you something. When a child becomes successful, the world says, she did it all on her own. But when a child fails, they look for the mother. So now that Jessica had succeeded, she thought she could amputate the limb that held her up. But I am not an old limb. I am the spine. And while she may have removed me from the spotlight, she could not remove me from the soil. She grew from me. And no amount of paint, polish, or Photoshop can scrub out roots that deep. She would learn that soon enough. I never expected to see him again. He was sitting at the cafe near the courthouse, dressed in a navy suit, glasses perched on his nose, reading a legal brief with a face so focused it made the world disappear around him. But I recognized him immediately, though it had been nearly 40 years since the last time I had seen that face. Back then, it had been smeared with dirt and tears. "Marcus?" I said, hesitantly. He looked up, startled. Then he blinked. "Miss Luann?" he said, standing so fast he nearly knocked over his coffee. "Miss Luann from the docks?" I smiled. "Well, My hands do not smell like fish anymore, but yes, it's me. He hugged me like someone clinging to a memory they thought they had lost. You're the reason I made it, he said. You gave me that sandwich every Thursday when I was sleeping behind the bait shop. You said, no one learns anything on an empty stomach. I remembered. A boy no older than 10, always barefoot, always hungry, but polite. I never asked his story. I just handed him the sandwich and said, come back tomorrow, same time. You're a judge now, I said, looking at the insignia on his briefcase. State level. Civil court. Not bad for a kid with nothing. I wanted to laugh, but instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small recording device. Marcus, I said, I need a favor, not a handout, just your eyes and your ears. I played the recording. Jessica's voice, clear as day, rang out. She's just the maid who birthed me. I only keep her around because pity looks good in fundraising speeches. The words hung in the air like poison. Marcus did not speak for a long moment, then he leaned back and said, You have more strength in you than half the people I sentence every week. I told him everything, the erasure, the humiliation, the altered photos, the gala speech, the memoir draft, the lies she sold in exchange for applause. He listened without interrupting. Then he picked up his phone. I know people, he said, not the tabloids, the ones who actually give grants, approve proposals, and sign contracts for public-facing positions. And just like that, the wheels of real justice began to turn, not in courtrooms, but in boardrooms. Within 2 weeks, Jessica's name was quietly removed from 3 advisory boards, 2 civil grant committees, and 1 statewide leadership program for young women. The final blow came when Marcus personally contacted the Public Integrity Board and handed them the recording. She was summoned to a private ethics hearing, no cameras, no press. When she walked into the room, expecting applause, she was instead greeted with silence. When asked to explain her comments, she fumbled, tried to claim the recording was out of context, then tried to cry, then blamed stress, then me. But the panel had already decided. She was suspended from participating in any government or community-sponsored leadership initiatives for 10 years. Her partnerships evaporated overnight. She received a call from her PR agency that same afternoon. They had terminated their contract. No refunds. The next day, headlines emerged. CEO who called her mother just the maid removed from all civic roles. Philanthropy fraud? Woman who built brand on family values caught insulting her own mother? Her image, so carefully cultivated, shattered in a matter of hours. And me? I made tea. I watered my plants. I watched the news with the volume low, just enough to catch the words. Former rising star, reputation in free fall. They asked me for a statement. I declined. But in the privacy of my kitchen, I whispered one sentence over and over. You forgot who fed you. She had spent years trying to rewrite her story, cutting me out, editing her roots, covering shame with silk. But she forgot the one truth that never changes. The tree that cuts off its own roots, no matter how tall it grows, is already dying. Marcus sent me a bouquet of wildflowers the next morning. The card said, You saved me when I had no name. Now, the world remembers yours. I stood by the window, looking out at the morning sun, feeling something I had not felt in years. Not pride, not revenge. Peace. Because justice does not always come with a gavel. Sometimes it comes from a sandwich given without asking. Sometimes it comes back years later, wearing a suit, holding your enemies accountable, not for you, but because they now know what you are worth. I sat at my kitchen table one morning, the same table where Jessica used to do her homework, the same table where I once cried into a cup of instant coffee the day my husband died. That day, as sunlight spilled across the faded wood, I opened the folder labeled Will and Testament. I had changed it before, quietly, privately, after the birthday incident. But this time, I was not just changing names. I was rewriting legacy. I removed Jessica entirely, not out of spite, out of clarity. And in her place, I wrote the name Violet Anders. Violet had been my neighbor once, back when we both had young daughters and even younger husbands. Her husband left her for a woman 10 years younger. Mine died suddenly on a Tuesday afternoon. We were both widowed in the same year, both left scrambling to rebuild our lives, with only grit and borrowed time. Violet became a teacher. I sold fish. But when my roof caved in during a storm, she was the one who let me and Jessica sleep on her couch for 2 weeks. She did not ask for rent. She just made tea and whispered, "We'll make it through, Luann. You're not alone." For decades, we stayed in touch. Christmas cards, calls on birthdays. She always sent a check for Jessica's college fund, small but sincere. Jessica never thanked her. So when I rewrote my will, it felt right. Violet did not know. She would not find out unless something happened to me. But the thought of her being able to help other women the way she helped me, that gave me peace. The amount? $1.3 million. Jessica would have spent it on brand campaigns and skin treatments. Violet would plant something that grew. And she did. Because 3 months later, after my attorney filed the final documents, I received an invitation in the mail. It was written in Violet's delicate handwriting, the same I had admired in every note she had ever sent me. Join us for the groundbreaking of the Luann Center, Job Skills for Women Over 50. She had used the money to launch a training facility for women like us, forgotten, underpaid, dismissed. Women who still had fight left in them, just no place to aim it. I cried for a long time that night. But the peace did not last. Jessica found out. She stormed into my house, holding a printout of the probate filing like it was a death certificate. Her voice shook the windows. "You gave it away?" she shrieked. "To that woman? You're senile. This is elder abuse." "I gave it," I said softly, "to someone who never treated me like trash." She looked at me like I had slapped her. "I built my brand on strength, on legacy," she hissed. "Do you know what it'll do to my image if people find out you disinherited your own daughter?" "I think they already know who you are," I said. She filed the lawsuit the next day, claimed I was mentally unfit, tried to freeze my assets, said I had been manipulated. Court took place in a narrow room with linoleum floors and fluorescent lights. Her lawyer tried to present my will as irrational, citing my age, old prescriptions, even a parking ticket from 3 years ago. But then Marcus took the stand, and the courtroom listened, not to my wrinkles, but to my record. But here is the thing about trying to erase a woman who has spent her life being invisible. Eventually, she learns how to leave evidence. Marcus, the judge, my old sandwich boy, testified that I was of sound mind, of sound memory, and of sound judgment. The court also played the recording again. "She's just the maid who birthed me." The courtroom went silent. Jessica flushed, tried to explain, tried to cry, tried to pivot. It did not work this time. The judge looked at her with eyes that had seen too many lies and ruled against her. Jessica not only lost the challenge, she was deemed unfit for guardianship due to her recorded statements, her pattern of public deceit, and what the court described as emotional toxicity. She lost shared custody of her children. Her publicist dropped her. 2 of her corporate sponsors pulled their contracts, citing moral misalignment. That night, I lit a candle for her. Not out of love. Out of mourning for the daughter I raised who had become someone I no longer recognized. But I also lit one for Violet. And one for the women standing in line at the Luann Center, learning how to write resumes, run their own shops, start second lives at 60. Jessica always said I was stuck in the past. But she never understood. The past is where my strength was forged. And now? Now it was her future that had been undone. By her own words. By her own arrogance. By the woman she tried to erase. And still, I stand. Jessica always believed she was irreplaceable. She thought charisma was enough, that a perfect smile and a curated Instagram feed could shield her from consequence. But business is colder than family, and far less forgiving. When she returned to her company headquarters, she expected sympathy. What she found instead was silence. Her access badge no longer opened the executive elevator. Her nameplate had been removed from the office door. and the sleek leather chair she once referred to as my throne was already occupied by a woman from internal finance, a woman who had quietly kept the company alive while Jessica was busy branding her own downfall. The receptionist barely made eye contact. "Board meeting's over," she said curtly. Jessica stood in the lobby for 20 minutes, waiting for someone, anyone, to acknowledge her. No one did. Eventually, her assistant walked by, eyes wide with discomfort. "I was told not to forward your calls," she said softly before hurrying away. Emails went unanswered. Partnerships were suspended, pending internal review. Brand ambassadors removed her name from bios. One sponsor posted a vague but pointed update. "We stand with women who uplift, not those who erase." Even her closest allies refused to return her calls, so she called me. It was 10:43 p.m. when the phone rang. I almost did not answer, but my old habits, deep ones, mother ones, still stirred. I picked up. For a moment, I heard only breathing. Then, "Mom." Her voice was thin, childlike, the same voice she used when she was 9 and had broken the neighbor's window. "Mom, I messed up." Silence. "I lost everything. The company, the endorsements, the kids. I do not even know how to pay rent next month." Still, I said nothing. She broke. "I did not mean to cut you out. I was just under pressure. Everyone said the brand needed a clean story. You would not understand. You have never had to manage an image." There it was again. Image. Always more important than truth. I waited until her crying turned into hiccups. Then I said, very gently, "Do you remember that Thanksgiving picture?" More silence. "The one where I was carving the turkey and you stood next to me in your little red dress?" "Yes." "You replaced me with your dog." You erased your own mother." "It was just a joke, I was. And now, I am just stepping back, not out of anger, not out of revenge, just peace." She gasped. "Please do not say that. I have nothing left." I looked out my window, the garden bathed in moonlight. "You once said I smelled like dead fish," I whispered, "but fish spoil when they are cut off from the bone." She did not answer. So I added, quietly, "You are learning that now." She sniffled. "What am I supposed to do?" "I do not know, Jessica. Maybe start where you ended me. Maybe learn how to make something that lasts." I did not hang up. But I did not say anything more. Eventually, she did. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "But apologies, like spoiled fish, have an expiration date." And hers had come far too late. The days move slower now. Not because I am old, though I am, but because, for the first time in decades, I am not rushing to keep something alive, no fish to scale, no floors to scrub, no daughter's approval to chase like a shadow that always moved a step further away. I live now at the Second Act Center, the place Violet built with the money I left her in my will, though I am still here to see it bloom. She named it that because she said we all deserve a second act, especially women who were told their best years ended at 30, or when the last child left, or when a husband died and no one looked back. They call me Miss Luann here. But the kids? They call me Granny Fish. They mean it sweetly. Every afternoon, a few of them gather around the wide bench under the lemon tree where I like to sit, and they ask me to tell the story again. "The one about the fish, Granny." So I tell them. About the woman who woke up at 3:30 a.m. for 17 years to gut fish, just so her daughter could wear clean shoes to school. About how the bus driver used to wrinkle his nose when I stepped aboard. About how the math teacher once called Jessica into the hallway and said, "Tell your mother to use perfume, dear." And I tell them how I never said a word back, not once. I just kept cutting, kept wrapping, kept working. Because I believed that if I stayed quiet and did everything right, it would all be worth it. Now, the kids laugh at the old fish jokes. Not cruelly, not like their parents did. One boy leaned against my shoulder once and said, "You smell like sunshine and bread, not fish." And I cried. Not loud. Just enough for him to say, "Did I say something bad?" I shook my head and whispered, "No, sweetheart, you said something beautiful." At the front gate of the center, Above the old wooden arch Violet insisted we keep is a sign carved by hand from reclaimed cypress wood. It reads, "Here, those once called maids are greeted with gratitude." Every time I pass under it, I straighten my back. I no longer smell of fish, but if I did, it would not be shame, it would be proof. Proof that I fed someone who later bit the hand that fed them. And proof that I could still feed others. Some nights, when the sun turns the windows gold and the air cools just enough to invite memories, I sit by the fountain with a little girl who just arrived last week. Her mother overdosed, her father disappeared. She does not speak much yet, but she clings to me like she has always known me. I held her close yesterday as she slept against my arm, her hair still smelling faintly of shelter soap. A volunteer passed by and smiled, whispered, "That one already thinks you're hers." Maybe she is. Maybe they all are. Now. Maybe that is what daughters should be. Not inherited by blood, but by love. When Jessica's name appears in the news now, it is in articles no one finishes reading. The algorithms are tired of her face. The people have moved on. She once said I did not belong in her world. But the truth is, she never belonged in mine. And as the light dipped lower, painting the courtyard in soft oranges and tired pinks, I rocked the little girl gently and whispered words I had been saving for years. "You said I was worth less than a dog." I paused, smoothing her blanket. "Maybe you were right. Maybe I am not worth more than a dog." She stirred in her sleep. But I gave birth to someone who could bark better than she could love. The wind moved through the trees, soft and forgiving. And I smiled, not bitter, not angry, just free. If this story stirred something in your heart, if you have ever been overlooked, silenced, or underestimated, then you already know justice does not always wear a robe, and love does not always come from those who share your name. It comes from the quiet ones. The ones who fed others while going hungry, who got erased from pictures but never from memory, who smelled of fish but carried the soul of steel. This is not just my story. It is the story of countless women whose sacrifices were mocked, whose love was mistaken for weakness, and whose silence held back hurricanes. And if you want more stories like this, real stories, true stories, told from the porch of a quiet life, please support our journey. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories for more voices that were never supposed to be heard, but now will never be forgotten. Thank you for listening. And remember, revenge has no expiration date. And when a grandma speaks, the world listens.